Good morning, Grace Community Church. Thanks again for joining me in these morning devotions from the Psalms. We're reading 5 Psalms a day, and then I'm picking one to spend a little time in together as we see who God is and what God is doing in these days. On the 28th of the month, the Psalms are 136 to 140. And if you read the 5 this morning, I'm sure for you, like me, you immediately landed on Psalm 139, which is a marvelous psalm, a favorite of so many. And so I am going to focus on Psalm 139 this morning and ask our questions of the psalm. First question is, who is God revealed to be in this psalm? What attributes or characteristics? And you'll notice immediately that unlike the last few psalms, all these titles and names for God just aren't there. You need to dig a little deeper or extrapolate a little. Who is God in this psalm? And we see him in verse 1 to 6 as the all-knowing God, the God whose knowledge is complete and comprehensive. In Psalms 7 to 12, we see him as the ever-present God. He is everywhere. There's nowhere we can go where God is not. He is always there. In verses 13 to 16, we see him as the Creator God, the one who creates us, the one who forms us, even in our mother's womb. And then in verses 19 to 22, it's quite a shocking change and departure when we see him as the just God, and we see the psalmist resonating with God's desire for his own glory. And so we see God as the all-knowing, ever-present Creator God who is on the throne and will do justly. Second question is, what's God doing in this psalm? How is God acting? And we see in verses 1 to 6, he is searching the psalmist. When the psalmist sits or rises, his thoughts, his path, God searches them all out. All his ways, all his words, God searches them. God knows them. God is in them. God is hearing and experiencing them, and God is intimately acquainted with them. In verses 7 to 12, he is, as it were, following the psalmist. Everywhere the psalmist goes, God goes. God is there, whether in heaven or in the grave, morning, evening, to the uttermost parts of the sea, God is there. God is the ever-present one who is with the psalmist everywhere he goes. Then verses 13 to 16, you see that he is weaving the psalmist. He's fashioning the psalmist. He has created and formed the psalmist even in his mother's womb. The psalmist makes who God is so personal in this psalm, and that's one of the reasons that we love it so much. So what about the psalmist? Well, we don't get as much insight into his circumstances here. We do see in verse 11, he says, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light about me be night. That darkness is not dark to you, God, for whom darkness is as light. And so he's in some kind of darkness. We don't know what that is. It feels like darkness or a period of darkness in his life. And we get a little more glimpse of it in verses 19 to 22. It's as if he lives in a world where he feels like his culture, the world around him, is not conforming to God's design or desires or purposes, and he feels out of step with the world, as if it's all contrary to following after God, and in defiance maybe of God's purposes. So, how does who God is and what God is doing relate to the psalmist? We've already gotten some glimpse of that, haven't we? So the psalmist knows him completely, and he says he's overwhelmed by this reality. It's incomprehensible that God would know him in such a way, that God is not a distant God so far off, a God who would just pay him occasional attention when things really got bad, and you shouted and called out loud enough, and then God says, oh, there you are. No. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high. I cannot attain to it. And then he sees God leading him because God is with him everywhere. He says in verse 10, even if I go to the uttermost parts of the sea, I'm not away from you, God. Even there, your hand shall lead me. Your right hand shall hold me. God is there with him in the dark, which is no darkness to God. And then you see this beautiful picture of our creation, God designing us and weaving us. We are unique creatures created in the image of God by God. And who you are is who God designed you to be. God wove you as this special creation of his design. Your gifts, your abilities, your personality, your appearance, everything about you, God designed. And so we take great comfort in knowing that we are woven, we are fearfully and wonderfully made, he says here. And then we see another sweet, comforting word here. Verse 16, in your book were written every one of my days. The days were formed for me as there was yet none of them. So what response is expected of us here? How does this apply to our current situation? Well, God knows us. God knows me. A sense of humility, such knowledge is too wonderful for me. There is comfort and security in God surrounding us. God surrounds me. There is this affirmation and sense of dignity in knowing that God created me. There is this confidence in knowing that God ordained our days before there was yet one of them. The coronavirus is no surprise to God. And then you have this sense of intimacy with God. Verse 17 and 18, how precious to me are your thoughts. How vast is the sum of them. If I would count them, they're more than the sand. I awake, and I am still with you. I awake in the morning. God is with me, as he's always with me. As he was with me in my sleep, he is with me in the day. He is ever there. He is ever my God. We are in this relationship, this love relationship. And then you have verses 23 and 24, which I have prayed thousands of times. Search me, O God, and know me. Try me and know my thoughts. If there's any hurtful way in me, lead me in the everlasting way. Is my response to what's going on around me today God-honoring? Or is there fear or doubt or despair or anxiety that needs to be revealed and rooted out? If I have an argument, God, search me and know me. In what sense am I responsible for this? How could I have responded differently? Was I proud and that pride came out in this conversation? Was I afraid? Whatever it was, Lord, let me see who I am as you see me. Let me see myself in the way you see me, God. Let me not be deceived about who I am. If there's distance between me and God, search me, God. Is there something in me I don't know? Is there some sin in me that creates a barrier between us? Show me, God. Reveal me. If I'm tempted in some way, God, show me why this is such a temptation to me. And show me who you are and how you are my satisfaction, that I may overcome this temptation. I mean, so many contexts you can apply these words and make them your prayer. So let's do so. Lord, search us and know us, know our hearts. Try us and know our thoughts. And if there's any hurtful way in us today, would you lead us in the way everlasting? Amen.